what's up, Spice Heads? Welcome back. Thank you guys so much for joining us for another great video meetup. It's been a little while. Hope you all have been doing well. Excited to be back. We've got a great show for you guys today. We're going to be talking all about everything you guys need to know about an Exchange Office 365 Exchange Online. Migration. For more on this, we have a great panel of experts for you all today, including an IT pro from the SpiceWorks community, as well as a couple of experts from Trusted Tech Team. So without further ado, let's go ahead and kick things off with a round of introductions. You guys know him best in chat as the one, the only Dim Forest, everyone's favorite hat enthusiast. Everyone, please welcome Mr. Brandon Diener to the show. Brandon, how's it going today?
Good. How are you doing?
We're doing well. Brandon, for those who have not met you before, do you mind telling us about yourself and what you do in real life?
Yeah, first off, it's weird to hear you say my real name because literally this is probably the first time I've been called Brandon other than like my boss calling me or my mom calling me. Everybody outside of work and my family calls me Dim Forest. I even have name tapes for the military and everything. So it's really odd. I feel like I'm in trouble or something. So, but you can call me whatever you want. That's fine.
All right, man.
But no, I'm a system administrator for a company called Smythe out of St. Paul. We had 9 locations. We'd make labels, yada, yada, yada. I do IT. So excited to be here.
Right. Sounds good. Everyone has already asking, how come no hat today?
Are they afraid of a man's head? I have the hat. I can put it on. Fine. All
right. And yeah, all right. The hat is coming back on. Excellent. Now I feel more comfortable. I don't know about everyone else. Well, thanks for joining us today, Brandon. Dim Forest did want me to let everyone know that he has closed out chat, so you guys don't need to spend time trying to make him laugh or saying meow or whatever. So just save your time. But thanks for joining us today, Dim Forest / Brandon. Excited to have you on.
Glad to be here.
Our next panelist is Mr. Nathan Bedoya from Trusted Tech. Nathan, how's it going today?
Good. Good to be here. Yeah, I'm the Director of Technology over here. I wear a lot of figurative hats. So I work with escalated support with our larger clients, whether it's on-prem or cloud stuff. I also serve as our local lead sysadmin, network admin, even our lead developer for some of our internal and external web apps. So basically the subject matter expert, or just another sysadmin with imposter syndrome, to be honest.
Sounds good. Don't we all? Yeah. Which would be a great topic for a different session for sure.
I know, right?
Thanks for joining us today, Nathan. We're looking forward to hearing.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And last but not least, we'd like to welcome back CEO of Trusted Tech Team, Mr. Julian Hamoud. Julian, welcome back to the show. How's it going?
Good, Justin. Good. Yeah. Third one's hopefully better than the second one, maybe. But yeah, again, my name is Julian. I'm a CEO, president of Trusted Tech Team. A few things I do around here: I just assess the direction of the company primarily, make decisions that drive the company in the wrong direction. I fire the good employees. I hire some bad ones. I take credit for everyone's hard work and show up late and leave early.
Is Nathan one of the good ones?
It's not true.
No,
it's not true.
Portland now, so we made him fly down here for the BMU.
All right, well, guys, thank you so much for joining us. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get any further. As always, if you guys have any questions for our panel today, make sure to get those questions into our Q&A widget down below. We'll be taking them later on in the show. Also, we would like to welcome everyone who's participating in chat today. Some of our favorite folks, including Girl Geek, Little IT Guy, Joel Kostelecki. I think I saw George Solon there as well. George, I just got back from Hawaii. I'm eager to talk to you about that as well. But of course, if you do participate in chat, we of course want to make sure that everyone's having a positive and professional time. So please adhere to our community guidelines. Dim, anything that you wanted to add? No. Okay.
No, I'm professional.
And
I'm an IT pro.
As a special thank you for hanging out this day, 2 of y'all are going to be walking away with Logitech. I'm not even going to pronounce it. Logitech surround sound speaker systems, which sounds pretty rad. Just in time for summer blockbuster season. Not that I advocate hacking or downloading pirated movies and watching them on your computer, but if you did, you're going to have a pretty sick sound system to be watching them on. So thanks for hanging out with us. We'll be announcing the winner of those prizes at the end of our show, as well as taking your questions later on. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started into it. Okay, so Exchange Online. it's one of these things where obviously it seems like it makes a lot of sense. It seems like it's a lot of folks' first foray into the cloud, mainly because people are tired of fuddling around with Exchange on premises. But Julian, let's start with you. You know, is Exchange Online everything that's kind of is cracked up to be? What are some challenges that organizations may face when it comes to migrating to Exchange Online?
Yeah, and just like you said, it's just largely around the fear of the unknown. There's a huge misconception around the process of migrating. So historically, even going back to like 4, 5, 6 years, the migration process has been really, really disjointed. There's been a lack of documentation, lack of migration segmentation, really just depending on the environment. We've also seen strong issues with internal bandwidth, so staff expertise or staff availability to conduct the migration and actually learn the migration process, along with just a lack of general knowledge on the topic. Also, we have companies that have just had such a massive amount of archives, and it just adds another layer of support, complexity, and really compatibility questions that would arise. And lastly, it was compliance. So different industries, different sectors, the actual migration process, it varies depending on each sector. And there wasn't really any good documentation on, hey, you're in this sector, you're in this industry, this is how you should be migrating in.
Okay, Brandon, DivForest, what about you? You know, your experience, you've overseen a few Office 365 Exchange Online environments. What are some of the challenges that you faced? Were any of them kind of particularly surprising?
The biggest challenge was lack of planning. I've been part of 2 of them so far. The first one was back in like 2012, 2013-ish, and it kind of bombed, and so it left a sour taste in our mouth after that for a while. But it was due to lack of planning. I wasn't part of the actual migration piece. I was part of the software deployment. That was back when you still had the numbered versions of Office that integrated with 365. Now they have their own flavor of the Office suite. But since then, though, I've been part of another one. That one went extremely smooth. And again, the biggest component of that was just the planning piece and making sure we had a ballpark plan and some help. We had an MSP help with the second one, too. So that was big. Big positive.
What exactly? What do you mean by it bombed? What went wrong specifically?
Well, I don't want to name names, but the other sysadmin was kind of a little flaky at best. Didn't really contribute to the project too much, and he had the most vital piece when it came time to the actual first cutover. We were doing a hybrid migration at the time, so we were kind of tiptoeing into it. We still utilized some of our on-prem stuff. And we had established a group that was going to be migrated over. And at the last minute, he decided to come up with his own group because he wanted a quote-unquote slice of the company. And that involved our CEO and a couple managing partners who had never heard of 365. So they found out about it over the weekend when our email stopped working. So, yeah. That was the big hiccup. Again, communication, lack of a plan, so...
That's a big part of the planning. I think also making sure that your management in particular is on board before you mess with their email.
Right, and like you said, the user preparation is a huge piece too. Prepping them for it so they know what to expect for the changes. That was massive in our success for the second migration.
Mm-hmm. And then, so yeah, kind of what were the biggest differentiators for the second more successful one? Was it just not messing with the CEO's email behind his back, or were there other things as well?
Yeah, that's a good start, I would say. I would include him last, maybe. And we took a little bit more of the low priority people first for our testing group before we cut everybody over in one fell swoop. But again, it was a lot of testing, a lot more planning, a lot of documentation that was divvied out to the end users as well. So they were familiar with what the changes were going to be and what to expect on that next Monday. And, there's always going to be little hiccups here and there. But ultimately, it was a pretty smooth process, and we did it all in one weekend, too. So
cool. All right. Nathan, let's go to you next. So Brandon had brought up moving to a hybrid environment. He mentioned that it was largely because they wanted to tow the water out first. Can you kind of go over the differences between going to full Exchange Online and a hybrid environment, and when organizations would want to go with one or the other?
Yeah, sure thing. So just to take a step back and before I dive in too much, a lot of this, I wish we had titled the talk with a little asterisk, because it's so situational. There's so many caveats. I don't mean to make any excuses, but it's so determined on each environment. Yeah, so people looking at hybrid deployments, they're trying to get the best of both worlds and really go at their own pace. Maybe not jump in completely, just dip their toes a bit. And there are a couple of different extents of how you could set up your hybrid deployment. The 2 big ones being, you could set up a minimal hybrid. So with that in mind, you're you're looking at going fully Exchange Online, but you kind of just want to move maybe, as Dan mentioned, like a single group, test it out. If it doesn't work out for you, you can always pull back. But it's still with a minimal hybrid environment. You're looking toward moving toward Exchange Online completely. Whereas there's also the full hybrid deployment. Takes a little more management on your part, but you get the full extensibility of a hybrid environment. So you'll get free busy, which is the big one that people look for when they set full hybrid.
Lost Nathan for a second. Nathan, we'll give you a chance to come back. Julian, anything that you wanted to chime in real quick while we're waiting for Nathan to come back?
Again, just diving into some of the features of either going to Exchange Online. Oh, Nathan. And he's gone.
I don't think he knows he was gone.
Yeah, he's still talking.
That's adorable.
Did I lose you guys? Did I just run around?
Can you back up maybe like a couple minutes?
You didn't lose us, we lost you.
I'll just do it over. So I'm not sure I cut out, but essentially, so I went over a minimal hybrid. That's if you're looking at going at your own pace, but eventually moving toward Exchange Online. Whereas a full hybrid, you'd probably set up if you're looking for free busy and maintaining your on-prem Exchange server in the future, and maintaining that over a longer period of time. And using Azure AD Azure AD Connect rather as your source of identity.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then so for a hybrid environment, is that like just a stepping stone to going to Exchange Online, or do you guys have clients that are running hybrid environments indefinitely?
Right. So we usually have clients that are running hybrid indefinitely. Not to get too specific, but if you're using any sort of on-prem connectivity, even if you go fully Exchange Online, you're still keeping a single Exchange server on-prem. It's an argument that people get into a lot. It's like, why do I have to keep this single on-prem server? So typically, we do see some extent of them maintaining a hybrid deployment. If they're not, that's usually when they go with, as I mentioned, a minimal hybrid, with the idea of going to fully Exchange Online in the future.
Mm-hmm. I have heard, like back in my Office 365 consulting days, I had heard that maintaining an on-premises presence allowed for just kind of more complete administrative capabilities. I don't know if that's still the case or if you guys had heard something similar.
Yeah, I haven't seen any changes, unfortunately. So, technically you can administer these, mailboxes without that last on-prem server. But it's not supported by Microsoft. You have to do some ADSI edit and a lot more work than you would, as you mentioned, if you just keep that last Exchange server on-prem. It's going to make your management a lot easier, and you have access to the full scope of user attributes that you would need to edit.
Can we talk real quick about kind of some Exchange Online competitors or just kind of alternatives that are available to folks? I mean, I think first and foremost, obviously, we think of G Suite as kind of being a big one, but even if you did want to stay in an Exchange environment, you do have the ability to not go Office 365, but host your Exchange with a local cloud provider or any number of options in that regard. Can you kind of talk us through, what Exchange Online offers that these other alternatives don't, and why you might want to go with one over the other?
Yeah. So, going back to what we just discussed. You have better integration if you're using your Active Directory. You might as well get the most out of that. So if you're using another service, say G Suite, there's some connectivity with your local AD, but it's not the same integration as you would get with Exchange. We have a lot of customers coming from GoDaddy, to be honest, and even 365 from GoDaddy, and it's really it's like a walled garden. I don't mean to criticize it too much, but it's a very basic level of Exchange Online, and you have to pay to unlock more features, whereas those would typically be included with an Exchange Online plan, or at least 365 plan directly through Microsoft or through a partner.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So maybe to answer a little bit more, the management experience, you get a lot more control, and you kind of break through that walled garden a bit by going to Exchange Online and breaking away from these third-party providers.
Okay. Brandon, Dim, can you talk a little bit about your experience with Exchange Online? What are kind of the main benefits that you feel like are better about Office 365 over on premises?
Well, with Exchange specifically, I don't have to manage an Exchange server anymore, which is great. I hate having to manage servers that I could just offload to somebody else. I'm only me, and I got minions that could probably do it, but I don't trust them. So it's nice to offload that to Microsoft. I trust Microsoft a lot more than I trust people managing my data center. If there's a power outage, something like that, we lose access to email, but this is in the cloud, so then my workers can still access their email, send emails, receive them, and so on and so forth. So yeah.
All right, cool. All right, and then Nathan. Well, and then let me ask you, Brandon. So you mentioned that you were going to hybrid. Was the plan back then to eventually go over to a full Exchange Online, or were you going to kind of live in hybrid land forever?
Yeah, well, that was when we were still kind of afraid of the cloud, and so we didn't quite trust where our data was going to be. So I don't know why we decided to even do it in the first place if we were that afraid of it, but apparently we talked enough people into it to try it out. So, but I know that the plan inevitably was to move to full cloud. We were going to do the whole Azure thing and everything. So, but I didn't stick around with that company long enough to find out if they did that or not. So, best of wishes to them.
Julian, let's talk next about licensing. I know it's everyone's favorite topic, but it is actually something that Trusted Tech does really well, and value that you guys provide to the IT community is being able to distill this down. Can you talk us through the actual licensing models for Exchange Online?
Yeah, so I wanted to keep it just specifically around Exchange Online. We had one of the first VMUs that we talked about the different suites, which we'll still discuss in short detail. But so two simple plans. It's Exchange Online Plan 1, and again, simply Plan 2. Plan 1 is usually the intro product into 365 and into hosted mail. It comes with a 50 gig mailbox, and again, you get a few add-ons alongside of it. It's typically priced around $4 a user per month, so it's completely scalable. And again, you only procure per user. Comes with anti-malware, anti-spam via a little package called Exchange Online Protection. If you're not familiar with it. You have shared calendars, contacts, and then you get the in-place archiving. So you pretty much, it's setting an Outlook, but you can automatically move both emails into a cloud archive instead of on-prem. With Exchange Online Plan 2, price doubles. So it starts at around $8 a month, but it doubles the capacity of storage in the user's primary mailbox to 100 gigs. You then move up to an unlimited archiving instead of the 50 one You have a few other features like data loss prevention. It's in accordance with PCI compliance, so it prevents things like raw credit card numbers to be typed and sent via email. One of the pieces of content we generated for this VMU, it's actually a comparison link. It shows the different suites. It's in the sidebar, but it shows the different suites of 365. Underneath there, it just gives you a raw comparison of EOP1 versus P2. But again, the plans themselves, it really reduces the cost of email alone and then adds different values into there. And then before the VMU, we were actually talking with Brandon about the suites, and it's something that everyone always goes to, but regardless if they start on EOP1, they usually go into a different suite that includes Office 365 and some of the other features. And then, Brandon, I guess pitching back over to you, do you use a suite right now, or do you guys just use Host Exchange?
We use the E3 suite primarily for a majority of our users, and we have some one-offs using E1, F1, but primarily E1 or E3. Sorry.
What did you guys start with, if you don't mind me asking? Did you guys always start with E3?
With E3.
You did. Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
We hopped right into E3 at this company. Yep.
Cool. Yeah. So from what we've seen, usually EOP1 is the starter, and then you'll upgrade into Business Premium for companies who have in excess of 300 users, or if they're looking for additional feature set included in E3. I think Brandon was using heavily using SharePoint as well. You'll go into different suites or whatnot, but again, trying to keep the focus directly on Exchange Online.
Cool. Nathan, let's talk.
Sorry, can you say that one more time? Okay. Oh, I thought you were asking me a question. Never mind. Hey, you guys. You had that look about you like you were asking me a question. Sorry.
It was
He does that.
Keeping you on your toes. Nathan, can we talk next about planning? So, I mean, Dimforce already brought up, planning. It's kind of the biggest thing. So what does that actually entail? What are some things that you feel like IT organizations should be doing to prepare for the migration?
Right. Yeah, that is the key to all of this, is prepping as much as you can. Yeah, so initially you'd probably start by sizing up your environment, or down if you're trying to, consolidate some of the stuff you're migrating. And as I went over Azure AD Connect, if you're utilizing that or intend on utilizing that, that's going to, shift where you're going to head. So that might be where you start, is looking at if you're using Azure AD Connect. But overall, taking that inventory, so sizing up your environment, so how much data you actually intend on moving. So that's, how many mailboxes, how large those mailboxes are. Are you just moving mail? It depends on your system. If it's IMAP, or if you're coming from Exchange, or if you're just moving mail versus moving mail and contacts, calendars. Any integrations that you have, that's one that gets looked over, unfortunately, and you're always running back to figure out why something isn't working. So that could be, say, like an ERP or CRM system that you have some mail routing with, or any like line of business apps, or even scanners that you have some sort of SMTP relay, any stuff like that. So inventorying and taking inventory of those specific cases where you might be already hooked in somewhere. Backup and retention policies that maybe need to be put in place before you move, or need to be ready to go. And just overall taking inventory of what you're currently using, what that source is, how you're going to manage identity, and how much data you're moving.
Okay. Brandon, anything that you would add to that, based on your experience?
No. He's the expert when it comes to migrations. Yeah, I trust everything he just said.
Amazing.
I'm hoping to never have to do another migration. It's stressful, but having help definitely helps. So.
Yeah, we if I could just jump back.
That's why they're the trusted tech team, by the way.
we try to keep that trust.
We trust them.
Yeah, it's in the. I believe we compiled a bunch of resources in the sidebar, whichever direction it is. There should be some pre-migration resources that can help you with preparing and planning, as well as determining what path you should take. So check those out.
Cool. And Julian, any other kind of advice around planning based on your experience?
That's always been the biggest thing is clients come and they're not utilizing the tools or the documentation that's provided, literally we'll dig into it a little later, but using different tools, which Nathan will talk about, like Mail Migration Advisor, take a lot of the legwork out of that, the time allocation, the very intro of the pre-planning. So use the tools that are available.
Cool. And then Nathan, let's go back to you. Let's talk about the actual migration. Can you talk to us about some of the different options that folks should be considering as part of their migration process?
Yeah, again, another asterisk right here. It's super dependent. You could be, deciding until the last moment, which you really shouldn't be. Prep as much as you can. But the four primary methods we see would be cutover, staged, hybrid, and then like using a third party. There are, a ton of smaller ones. I mentioned IMAP. You could just, if you're real small, you could just do some sort of like PST export, import sort of thing. But generally, the four ones I mentioned are the major ones. Cutover, Dim mentioned it slightly. Typically, you'll do that coming from Exchange Server 2003 or above. It's best suited for 150 mailboxes or less, and you're really just trying to get it done over a weekend or a short span of time, when users aren't going to be trying to access their mailboxes, such as a CEO. Simple, create a migration endpoint, connect to 365, run that initial migration batch, cut over your MX records. That's where the cutover comes from. I think it's also called Big Bang, or used to be. And then you would delete that migration batch, make sure everything's synced up, and that's it. So there's no real going back after that except another migration. But it's just peeling off the Band-Aid. It gets it done. And we've done it a few times. It works for small organizations. There's nothing wrong with it. Technically, it doesn't have to be from an on-prem environment. You can be coming from another service and sort of do like a cutover, because you're just cutting over the MX record. Things to look out for, your users would have to recreate their Outlook profiles. So preparing for that, you can make sure you can drop down your TTL value in DNS as much as possible. Yeah, that one's pretty straightforward, small. Stage I mentioned was the other one. We don't see this as commonly, at least if you're defining by Microsoft's terms. They say a stage is meant for Exchange Server 2003 or 2007. So we do see it very rarely, but not very common. And this in this regard, you're just syncing with Azure AD Connect actually, and migrating your data in batches. And there's like a little bit of coexistence. You can technically do stage in other platforms, but by Microsoft's definition, that's usually when you're coming from Exchange 2003, 2007. You're just migrating in batches before you shift over completely to Exchange Online. And then the hybrid is the big one we sort of gone over quite a bit. This is if you're coming from, or if you're working with Exchange Server 2010 or above. There's the full and minimal migration paths, as I mentioned earlier. So with this migration path, you're deciding if you're going to at least keep your on-prem server to some capacity, depending on how long is how you choose minimal or full. And it can range from a few clicks of the hybrid configuration wizard. That's the tool you'd be utilizing on the Exchange server, or some extended management if you're going with that full hybrid deployment. And then maybe second most common next to hybrid is the third-party migration. And so that's migration wiz from BitTitan or Skykick. There are other services like Quest, but we typically work with migration wiz. And so you're trading costs going this route, but it can help manage really large migrations, or maybe you're coming from a source you don't have too much control over. BitTitan does a really good job of coming from a lot of sources. It's really impressive. So if you have the budget to swing it, BitTitan is the other method that we see customers taking.
Okay. And then with all these third-party tools, does it depend on your circumstance which tool is going to be the best fit, or is it pretty much kind of these are all the best of breed?
Yeah, so you wouldn't be using the hybrid configuration wizard if you're just going to do a cutover migration. That's pretty much just for hybrid. That's on your on-prem server. If going a third-party tool, if that's what you mean, like more specifically BitTitan, yeah, it's really all-encompassing. It doesn't really, they're not too picky about the scale. It's not a it's a one-size-fits-all sort of thing. It can do a lot, and that's what you're trading the cash for, really. It's really flexible.
Okay. And Brandon, let's talk to you next. So which of these migration methods that Nathan mentioned were you guys using? I know you mentioned the hybrid in the past. What about for your second migration?
You're still the only one calling me Brandon in this chat, just so you know. So the first time we did hybrid, and you heard the story about that. Then we did cutover on the second one, and we used an MSP, and they actually used BitTitan as well for their portion of it. So very quick, very smooth, very painless too.
Were you guys migrating?
That was about 400-ish at the time.
Okay, so it was a little sizable then.
So obviously a little bit higher than what the best practice was that he listed earlier, but you only YOLO once.
What's the worst that can happen?
Yeah. Like to live on the edge.
Nathan, can you go over again kind of, out of these migration methods, how do we know which one is going to be the best for our needs?
Yeah, so just running through the bullet points. If you want to take notes, this is the time to do it. It's, number of mailboxes, more specifically the amount of data, the source you're coming from. So if you're coming from Exchange server, you have the most options available to you from a baseline perspective. But if you're looking at keeping that Exchange server, you're now going down that hybrid path. If you're coming elsewhere other than Exchange, so another provider, your options are a little bit limited, by scale and that provider. So now you have to determine how those two things play together. As I mentioned, identity authority. So if you're using a local AD, you're syncing with Azure AD Connect, how that plays into your migration method. So as I mentioned, a cutover method, you're not going to be using that Azure AD Connect. Technically you can use it afterward, but if you're currently using it, you're going to have to do some management before you actually do that cutover migration. Time frame, that's another one. Are you being crunched for time? How much prep can you do? How much data do you have to move and how long do you have to move it is another big one. So, ultimately, as we mentioned, sort of the Mail Migration Advisor built into 365 walks you through these questions or these bullet points. It can help help customers determine what migration method is best for them. Aside from the Mail Migration Advisor, I think there's a link in the sidebar. Using a human advisor, so either us or an MSP or an Exchange Online expert that you're already working with and comfortable with, they should be able to point you in the right direction.
Cool. All right. Let's go to Julian next. So once you've migrated over to Exchange Online, excuse me, how does the experience change both for the users as well as for IT organizations?
Yeah, I think we're a little biased since we've used it for a little while, but overall it is easier once you get acclimated to it. There's little to no hardware involved with the exemption, of course, like hybrid environment, you have a minimal environment, but it's a web app. It's accessible from really anywhere. And then you have automatic maintenance and updates that push directly into the Exchange Admin Center. Looking at the two differences really though between like a hosted and on-prem, it just really depends on where you're migrating from. If you're we're presently on Exchange 2013 and 2016 and moved up, you're really not going to notice much of a difference. Everything's just managed through Exchange Online Admin Center. If you have like a Linux box that's storing mail, you now have an enterprise management console available directly through portal.office. So again, it really just depends on where you came from.
Okay. And then Dim, anything that you felt like the users needed to be educated on kind of as part of the migration in addition to letting them know that it actually happened?
This is going to be weird, but the biggest thing that we had issues with was just them remembering to punch in their credentials and knowing what their Office 365 password was or Exchange Online password was the first time, because that was the biggest shock. They adapted to the new software, if there was new software, pretty rapidly. We had documentation for that and training ahead of time, but it was the passwords, the password screens popping up for them that kind of threw them for a loop. Mm-hmm. So it's little things like that you just got to kind of keep in mind.
Yeah. And then Julian, any kind of final, differences between hosted and on-prem that folks ought to be aware of?
Yeah, just I guess overall, like final piece of advice, just do as much research and preparation as possible. If you have the time and resources, run test migrations. A lot of the third-party tools actually have like sample migrations you can conduct on test user mailboxes. Look at the 365 features and functionality. It really brings down the pricing as like an overall. The Mail Migration Advisor is amazing. I've been using that for quite a few years. And then again, back to Nathan's statement, User Advisor, they're always free for an assessment. And even if it leads you in the right direction and you're going to go and do a cutover method yourself, get as much information, I guess, as like fast as you can. And then I guess, Brandon, do you have any piece of advice that you've ran through that was crucial in process?
No, I think you hit it on the head. It's just preparation and everything, yeah.
Cool.
I trust you. All trust right. The tech team.
All right, guys. We have a ton of questions coming in. Let's go ahead and get started into it. I've got a question from CyberSec Hacker. This person says, biggest issue we have come across is licensing compatibility when it comes to 365 is the retail copies of Office programs such as Visio and Project. Have you guys encountered this before? What do you guys typically recommend? Julian, is that something that you'd like to address?
Yeah, so just really in regards to, so all the perpetual versions of Visio and Project are now available through Office 365. So you have your Project Online Professional. You can also download local versions. So literally everything that was perpetual and on-premise via desktop applications is now integrated into 365. Cost ranges between like $30 for Project and $15 for Visio. Yeah, pretty much everything that, users who aren't integrated into 365, all the features that they think that might not be available, they're available in some kind of package or suite.
Okay. Let's get a question from Texian. How simple is e-discovering and exporting to PSTs in Office 365? Nathan, do you have an answer for that?
Sure. Yeah, it's really simple now. A lot of the stuff, I hate to keep putting asterisks on everything. It changes a lot. Microsoft is constantly working on this stuff. But it is very easy. You would go into the Security and Compliance Center to manage any of your compliance, your e-discovery, run any tests with that. You get some, I think Julian went over it a little bit, you get some baseline, tools that you can use in Exchange Online Plan 1, and then that gets built out in Exchange Online Plan 2. But pretty much all your management is straightforward. Just go to the, I believe it's protection.office.com. Again, it changes a bit every now and then. They just merged them for Microsoft 365. But yeah, Security and Compliance Center, it's just like the 365 Admin Center, so it's a more unified experience. And you can export from there, run any of your e-discovery tests from there as well.
Mm-hmm. And there's also third-party tools as well, right? That can, take your Office 365, other sources.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, we say, if you're already paying for, if you're, utilizing 365, we typically keep people in that realm. But yeah, you can, link up with any sort of security and compliance that you have. Any sort of rights management as well is built in. You can integrate with Azure information protection as well and build that out. But yeah, third-party solutions, and it's pretty well built out by itself.
All right, Dim, have you guys messed with e-discovery at all? Is that something that is a concern for you guys?
No.
Okay, cool. Let's go to Spectre01101. Any suggestions on merging multiple Office 365 accounts together from several acquisitions? Does not seem that Office 365 has native tools to do this. Either Nathan or Julian, have you guys had to deal with acquisitions and merging Office 365 accounts?
Yeah, I think it's primarily around like if you're a separate provider like GoDaddy or Rackspace and actually integrating from, it's pretty much 365 to 365. So whenever this occurs, we usually use BitTitan, and we use those to transfer over, again, from pre-existing. Some companies actually really do lock down, as Nathan was mentioning earlier, they'll lock down the account, so migration does have to occur. With most providers, as long as you're on portal.office.com, really nothing has to occur. Nathan, any other feedback on that?
Yeah. So I hope I understand the question correctly, but yeah, it depends on the scope of the. So mergers and acquisitions, I know, is on Microsoft's radar. It's pretty high up there. So that they are working on making it easier, but it does depend on the scope. So if it's just adding a domain into a 365 tenant, that's very straightforward. But if you're migrating data, that's when it can change. Are they now being pulled into your Active Directory as well? So you're gonna have to do some management on that sort of thing. It depends on the scope, but generally, a small acquisition, if you're just merging their domain and adding it to the existing 365 tenant, it's pretty straightforward.
Okay, all right. Let's go to some other questions. Matt Daddy, 2005, says, what's the minimum number of people you would move over at a time? Nathan, any suggestions from you?
Minimum. It depends on the size, because you could have 100 users, but they're barely utilizing, or their mailboxes aren't that big. They're not using too much data, and then you could have those 4 users that just have a ton of. It really depends. At a time, I don't know. I'd probably do about 25. I think it's a good rule of thumb. Depends on the method you're taking. I assume this is coming from a batch perspective. But yeah, it really, going into where you're coming from.
Demographic of your users too.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, like understanding how much data those users are using, because say you're coming from G Suite. I know they have a data cap. I think it's around 2 gigs a day. You can only migrate 2 gigs a day. That could be one person's mailbox. So you're limited to one that single day. So just understanding those limitations is the key part there.
Okay. Dim, anything that you would add? You feel like 25 is a good number?
No, like I said, as long as you have at least 25 users, I guess. If you have 24, then you can only do 24. So.
Yeah.
Then you have to create one.
At least one.
Okay. Let's go next to, let's stay with Matt Daddy 2005. Is there a minimum number of users that Office 365 would not be beneficial and should stay with hosted on-premises Exchange? Nathan, we'll start with you.
I think Julian. I don't know the pricing cutoff, if that's what they're looking for.
I guess primarily around. Yeah.
Personally, I would try to get to Exchange Online. I'm sure Dim feels the same way. I would try to. There's no minimum to me. I think if they're looking from a pricing perspective, yeah, I think Julian can answer that better. But it's really, if you're only managing, those 24 users, you probably don't need a full-on on-prem environment. If you can swing it and go to Exchange Online, it's going to cut your overhead quite a bit, even just for those 24 users.
Yeah, and
it future-proofs you for growth as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
We see a lot of users actually saying that, hey, I'm encroaching this certain amount of seats or a certain amount of employees in the company. Now I'm getting ready to migrate. Where adversely, we like to say, hey, while you're growing, while you're still small, migrate. It's easy, easiest thing to do. So again, as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it would seem to me that
it's a much easier project when you're smaller too.
It's better for smaller environments, right? Because it's, the upfront costs aren't as high, and it's the licensing basically fits a smaller business better than it would, an extremely large enterprise organization. That's just my 2 cents. Let's talk next. Doug wants to know about backing up mailboxes, and I'm going to add on to this. Brandon, Nathan, and Julian. What do you guys do for backup? And then when does it make sense to do with third parties? That's a question that we get a lot. Is that something that you guys feel should always be looked at? Or, can you use kind of the native Microsoft tools to manage your backup? Yeah, sorry.
So I mean, you get some archiving or backups already built in. You can play around with those policies. I mean, it's already coming with the service that you're paying for. So I would just utilize those as much as you can. Again, it depends on your scale and your company's compliance policies. How strict, like if you're following HIPAA compliance, very stringent, strict compliance rules, you're probably gonna have to, maybe, and you're large, you're probably gonna look at a third-party solution. We do see it commonly, but typically, if you can, I think Exchange Online provides the backups and archiving that you need.
Okay. Brandon, what about you guys? Do you use native backup? Do you guys go outside third-party?
We use native backup unless it's a high priority user. Then we have them back it up to a server share every now and then those are backed up by our backup system. So, but otherwise, we don't use any third-party app to integrate with 365 for backing up mailboxes.
Okay. This is a good one. Stuart CK wants to know, do you see Microsoft in the future removing availability of local install of Exchange and provide an Exchange Online only? Julian, that's a presidential question if I've ever heard one. Can you predict the future of Microsoft? Are they going to give comments?
I think the answer with pretty much everything that's perpetual is it's going to go away. We saw Adobe make that push before anyone, and we're slowly seeing Microsoft make the same push. So again, getting acclimated sooner rather than later is just the best answer to that question.
Mm-hmm. I think officially they're saying it's never going to go away, but they always say
that.
Yeah. Cool. Let's talk again about the third-party tools. We did talk about BitTitan. CD87 wants to know, what about the folks who are a little lower budget than BitTitan? Is PowerShell the easiest and next best thing? Or do you guys have any other recommendations for low-cost to free 99 migration tools that are available? Nathan or Julian, any recommendations?
Again, it really depends on. I would go through the stuff in the sidebar and determine what your path is. It's so dependent. But yeah, I would. To me, that sounds like that's potentially a cutover migration. So I would start there and see if that works for you. See if that meets your needs, and then that's when you start expanding out. You typically won't be getting into any PowerShell until after the migration process. So you shouldn't have to deal with any of that unless you're already utilizing an Exchange on-prem environments, and then you're probably just looking at using the hybrid configuration wizard, and it's very simple. So I would start there instead if that's the case.
Cool. Eagle Mitchell wants to know this question. Let's go to Julian for this one. So if you're using hybrid Exchange, do you still need to buy licensing for the on-premise on-site Exchange server, or does the Exchange Online license provide you with the licensing for that local setup?
This is a great question. Nathan and I were actually just discussing this last week. So yeah, you do have to still maintain licensing for the on-premise environment. Presently, again, you have to essentially maintain both. And again, Nathan and I were pitching ideas back and forth on how to tackle this. So, but yeah, you still need local exchange, you still need local CALs, and then of course you have your Exchange Online plan. Regardless if it's in a suite or by itself, yeah, you do need to have both.
Yeah, so Microsoft actually provides. It should be an Exchange 2016. It's not meant for a full Exchange. This isn't supposed to be like a full-on server. It's really just meant for management purposes. So Microsoft actually provides an Exchange Server 2016 license for that purpose. That said, yeah, you would still need to license that server that it's sitting on. But that actual Exchange Management Server license is provided by Microsoft. I think the link has changed around the past couple of years, so I can't reel it off the top of my head, but it's out there.
Okay, cool. Another licensing question from sysadmin22. Can Teams be used with Exchange on-premises licensing, or do you have to buy that separately? Julian, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, Teams does have to be procured. It can be, of course, procured through 365. So Skype for Business is going away, and it's all integrating into Teams. But yeah, you can, of course, use like Portal Office. You'll have Teams integrated through your 365 account, and then you can use it on-premise as well.
Cool. Alan Stoddard has another question about migration tools. So does Migration Wiz or BitTitan allow for phased migration, or is it all or nothing? Nathan, go ahead and answer that. Yeah,
so typically what you would normally do, again, it depends on the path, but yeah, you would typically do a staged migration. You'd be moving these mailboxes in batches. I think where companies determine that is, how long it's going to take them and what sort of coexistence they need. So typically you're moving the batches either just to try it out. Even with like you're doing the full thing, you're technically moving like an initial batch. It's there, and then you do another, it's called a delta pass, and it'll get anything that wasn't moved in the initial one. So to some capacity, you're doing like staged batches. But yeah, you could do it at your own pace. You build out the deployment in Migration Wiz how you prefer it, and you can move a batch of mailboxes at a time. There's certainly best practices and guides for whatever source you're coming from, what you're doing, but you can play around with it and go with what you're envisioning as well.
All right, cool. This one's from T. Roberts too. I'm going to kind of abstract this a little bit. So if you're moving from hosted Exchange to Exchange Online, is there anything unique or different about that type of migration than on-premise to Exchange Online?
Yeah, it depends on the scope of access the provider gives you, right? You certainly, we've seen it, like you may be able to connect to that Exchange Online server or use it as an endpoint to go to 365, but that's not common. It depends on how much access they give to you. You may be, and the scale, you may be able to export all of your data and then migrate into Exchange Online. Or you may be looking at a cutover migration as well. It really depends on what sort of access they give you, or if they even provide a migration process for you as well.
Great, very cool. And let's take a question from Luigi the cat. And Nathan, this may be a short question. This may be too long for the amount of time we have left. But Luigi wanted to know, I'd very much like to hear more about Azure AD setup. Can you go over that? Seems like it would be a good first step in the migration process.
Yeah, it could be. So again, there are certain migration paths. It can get very specific, but I say you're going with a cutover, you'd actually have to remove that Azure AD Connect setup. But typically, what you're using it to do is initially sync those users that you're going to be creating mailboxes for, right? So you're setting up Azure AD Connect as your source of identity. So there's this single source of identity for people logging into their Exchange Online accounts. I don't know. Should I go into like the process of configuring Azure AD Connect, or what sort of scope?
Conversation.
It's a rabbit hole.
It is a rabbit hole.
It really is.
Well,
yeah.
We'll maybe have him reach out to you guys after the fact.
Absolutely, please. Yeah, send me an email.
Okay, this is a good one. Brandon Clone was asking about, we've been talking about backups for mailboxes, but what about disaster recovery in the event that Exchange Online becomes unavailable? And suppose you have email that's business critical. Nathan, what have you guys done in the past, or do you guys have any recommendations?
Yeah, so in the crazy chance that it does happen, there actually has been some health issues with Exchange Online recently, or at least Outlook profiles. So when things are wonky like that, and it does happen, no one's perfect. I think having like some sort of SMTP relay, honestly, some sort of backup in place for accessing that email, if that's what they're looking for. So redundancy and where can that mail forwarding go as quickly as possible, if that's an option for you. Yeah, again, it rarely happens. Microsoft's pretty good with their data centers and the regions having redundancy themselves. But if that's the case, and it's a serious concern for you, I would definitely set up any sort of backup relay service.
All right. Let's take a question. I can't. Go ahead.
Sorry. I don't know if Dim had anything to add to that. If you have any sort of specific backups that you guys or preparations that you've done like that.
No, no, we don't do any backing up of anything off of 365. Like I said, we kind of live on the edge, but we haven't had any issues so far in the last almost decade that I've used it. So, but we did have those 2 incidents with Exchange Online recently in the last couple of weeks. So, but we've worked through that.
Do you just essentially live with the downtime, or you guys don't have any kind of redundancy provisions in place? It seems quite complicated.
We didn't have any downtime per se with it. They just couldn't access their Exchange Online profiles via Outlook, the client, so they had to go through OWA instead. So it's a little bit of a pain. The functionality is not exactly the same. Yep, but the functionality is still there enough, I guess, for them to get by.
Yep. Cool. Got a question from Fikester. We missed integrating Azure AD during our Office 365 migration. Is Azure AD still doable after the migration?
Yeah, definitely. It depends on the federation, or what you're expecting to be your source of identity. I can't say for everyone, yes, it's absolutely available. But if by saying you missed it, I assume that there's no problem setting it up retroactively. Yeah.
All right, very cool. Well, guys, we are about out of time. I just have a couple more questions for Dim for us. Dim, Commandlet wants to know what's your favorite cereal.
I don't need cereal. I do wood chips and I put motor oil on it, and that's all. I'm a man.
Gross. And then B Weber 83 wants to know what's your recommendations for migrating from a non-hat to a hat environment.
I have no idea.
How do you prep for that?
All right, guys. It's time to wrap up. I wanted to give you guys one last opportunity to share some final thoughts or advice. Brandon, for folks that are planning or just starting out their Office 365 migration experience, what's some final advice that you got for them?
Don't skip on the planning phase and the preparation phase. Make sure you train your end users as soon as possible. Get them up to speed, so that Monday or whatever day it is when you cut over, they're not surprised by it. They're ready for it. Remember the password thing? They're going to have to punch in their password 3 or 4 times. So it sounds stupid, but that was a big hang up for us, and we had people running around the desk and everything answering phones like crazy. If you can, use an MSP. Use one of the tools like BitTight and everything. It makes it 10 billion times easier. And for everything else, go to spiceheads.chat, use Trusted Tech Team, and who has live sports? World Star, whatever. Meow, meow, meow.
Nathan, any final takeaways from you for the audience today?
Yeah, same thing. Prep as much as you can. If you have the time for it, which I hope you do, prep as much as you can, do as many tests as you can. It's real easy to get 365 trials spun up for free. Just make some fake mailboxes, start doing fake migrations if you can. It'll get you so much more familiar with the process, really bring that stress down, and you'll catch any roadblocks that you may run into, and you can build out your own documentation. So when it's go time, you're ready to go.
Cool. And Julian, any final takeaways from you?
Yeah, you guys. So again, going back, use an MSP, use an advisor. Even if you have any pending questions, even the Active Directory, whether it's pre or post migration, you guys have a Calendly link, and literally it's completely free. We don't charge for anything. Even if you're going through like a cutover method, we have documentation and tips and tricks that we'll give over to you guys. So just make it as seamless as possible. There's so much free help out there.
All right, sounds good, guys. All right, it's now time to announce the winner of our prize. The winner of our Logitech surround sound systems are going to go to Hiking Mountains and Migs. Congratulations, Hiking Mountain and Migs. You guys
are made up names.
Of the prizes. Send a private message to Matt Y in the community. Let him know where you would like them shipped. And I hope you guys enjoy them. Big thank you again to our panelists, Julian, Nathan, as well as Zim Forrest. You guys were rad. Had a great time hanging out with you guys today. And I hope we get a chance to do this again sometime real soon. Make sure to check out all the other upcoming events that we've got by clicking on the orange button that says click here for upcoming shows, or by sticking around until after the presentation ends. But until next time, guys, stay safe, keep it spicy. Brandon, you want to sign us off?
Oh, World Star.
There you go. Thank you. All right. I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye, everyone.
Cheers.